Hey, good morning, team. And once again, it's week 2 of OS 320, Cultural Awareness. And anyways, I wanted to talk a little bit more about a subject that we started talking about in the discussion board, and I found it very interesting. And I think it's something to talk about and to look at again, and that's how we view history through our cultural lens, right? So, for instance, we look back through history with our experiences and our cultural awareness that we have today. So things that happened in the past seem very strange to us, especially if it's in different cultures. And one of the specific discussions that we're having was about the issue of slavery. Now, I, of course, am not a proponent or support the practice of slavery. But as we look through history, we look at it in the issue of slavery from our experiences recently in the United States on how we treated slavery in the 18, 17, and 1600s, which is not the same throughout history. So, for instance, the ancient Greeks had slaves. So Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, the fathers of modern Western ethics, were slave owners. So did they view slavery the same as a southern plantation owner in the 1800s? Most likely not. And I mean this because warfare changed. Now, when we invade a city or a country, we have an occupying force, and we rebuild the city. Now, in ancient Greek times, what would happen was you would invade a city and you would destroy the city and you would plunder the city. You would take the riches, all the men would be dead, and some of the plunders would be the women and children. If you did not take the women and children, they would be cast aside and they would most likely die on their own because there was no men left to protect. So that would be one form of slavery back in those days. Another form would be what we called indentured servants, because you owed money to somebody, therefore you worked the land or you did work for that person. Hence, you were kind of a slave. Much like we today are slaves to our mortgage companies. So they had a different view of slavery. And the same is true in ancient Egypt. You know, we view slavery in Egypt much like what is written in the Old Testament. Now, if you look at the ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics and their historical account of the slavery, they had a view saying slaves were government employees. They worked for the pharaoh. Much like I work for the government. So, once again, it's a different viewpoint. Same can be said in the ancient Romans. But we view it with our cultural, excuse me, got a bit of a cough, with our cultural perspective of today. And so, as we look through history and look at history, have this in mind. So, for instance, I remember about 10 years ago, you could read about Julius Caesar. And, 1 year Julius Caesar is a great politician, a orator, a representative of the people. In other years, he's a horrible dictator. So it all depends on how we view it today. Last year, there was a big debate about not Alexander Hamilton, but Andrew Jackson, right? He was going to be removed from the $20 bill, and Harriet Tubman was going to be put on. And I don't know if that's still the plan. I haven't looked into it, but I remember there was a big debate about the evils that Andrew Jackson committed. One of the things was he told the Cherokee to get off their land in Georgia and commenced the, quote, Trail of Tears, where he had them march to Oklahoma. And that was a horrible thing. And the Supreme Court at the time actually ruled against Andrew Jackson's ruling and said, you can't do this. And he said, amass an army and stop me. So he went against the Supreme Court ruling, and that's very bad. However, he did a lot of great things also for the country at the time. So, we tend to forget these things or review it through our cultural lens. And one of the specific things that we were talking about was Christopher Columbus. Some years he's a great hero, a great discoverer. Other times he's a slave trader. Did he bring Native Americans over as slaves into Europe? Yes, he did. There's no doubt about it. He did multiple trips. I think it was 5 trips to the Americas. One of them he was shipwrecked. Another one, he fought a cannibalistic Indian tribe. The history books don't talk much about that. But yeah, he did bring slaves over to Europe. Was he the only one? No. Every country practiced slavery in the 1400s. So, it's not like it was an isolated incident on his part. And it wasn't just Western civilizations. Native Americans did it. Africans did it. They did it in Asia all the time. So it was a common practice, and now that, we look at it from our cultural perspective, it's pretty awful. And it still happens. It still happens here in southern New England. People come over and get their passports taken away by an employer and hence become a slave, It happens. It's illegal and it happens. But anyways, it's something to talk about and something to think about, our historical cultural perspective and how things change. Okay, so I just wanted to record this short video because I thought it was a great discussion, and I look forward to reading more.